Yes. So I don't want to take up too much time. I think I'll now hand over to Evelyn to get this started, to introduce herself, and to really just get in. So over to you, Evelyn.
Wonderful. Thank you. Hi, everyone. It is very nice to meet you all. Happy to be here and talk about planning. Planning is obviously a topic that is near and dear to a lot of our hearts based on the attendance in this session. And my goal is not to cover every single thing that you could ever need to know about planning. I certainly am not, you know, the sole expert in the world on planning, but is more to talk to you about my journey and my experience developing planning processes at GlossGenius, which is where I work, and how some of the lessons and tips and tricks that I've learned that might be applicable to you too. So a little bit of an agenda, quick intro and background. Why do we do company planning? I think it's always an important place to start. Components of a great planning process. We'll head into a bit of a case study on evolving planning at GlossGenius and how we've grown and evolved our planning process. And then we'll end with some final tips and tricks. So a little bit of background. I'm Evelyn. I'm the Chief of Staff to the CEO at GlossGenius. I've been here since January 2020. I joined pre-Series A, seen the company grow a lot since then. I sit on our leadership team. I currently manage 4 people in operational functions, but I've spent time in pretty much every area of the business at different points over my time here. And I implemented the first planning process at GlossGenius, and then many iterations of the planning process since then. Before GlossGenius, I was at Bridgewater for about 5 years. Bridgewater is a hedge fund where I learned a lot about frameworks for getting things done, for getting buy-in, for driving decisions across an organization. And that's really served me well at GlossGenius. And then a little bit about GlossGenius. We are a Series C SaaS company that is focused on business management solutions for beauty and wellness businesses. So basically back office operations for salons, spas, barbershops, et cetera. We have over 75,000 customers who rely on us for their operational workflows, their fintech needs, everything they need to run their business, backed by some top venture investors, and we are currently about 300 team members. You're going to see in a little bit how that's evolved through time. So why do we do company planning? Few reasons. First and foremost it's really about alignment. It's about driving alignment on the most important priorities for the business, driving alignment on the course to get there. It's about communicating a clear and exciting vision for how people are spending their time, and about giving team members a North Star to reference when they're making day-to-day decisions. So if you're thinking about, why are we doing this? What's really the point here? It's to drive alignment and to communicate that alignment so everyone knows how they can be best contributing to the company's goals and objectives. And if any of you are working at startups like like I have, you will know that there is no shortage of things to do and no shortage of great ideas that people have. And planning gives you a little bit of a framework to wrangle those ideas and make sure that the things that you're working on are driving the impact and the results that you actually want. So a few signs that you might be ready for company level planning. First of all, you have a strategy or at least some general vision for where you want to go. This doesn't need to be this like super robust strategy document that's been, vetted through all these frameworks and this and that, but you should have an idea where you're going. You should have ideally product market fit. I think before that, you are kind of in this like throw stuff at the wall to see what sticks mode. And I can tell you a little bit about my own story here, but getting buy-in for a planning process is difficult. And frankly, you're not even thinking that long term at that point. You're really thinking about like, how do I get the next customer? How do I get the next piece of the product together? So this sort of like more robust company planning process can feel like overkill. Another sign, you have departments beginning to form. So this doesn't mean you need to have, again, like 100 people per department and a lot of hierarchy and this and that. But if you're in that stage where all of your departments are just one person or maybe 2 people, you probably don't need a super robust company planning process, but there still might be some lessons that are valuable here. And then I think the biggest one is you're starting to feel the pain of coordinating efforts across different departments. I remember we reached this point at GlossGenius where I was kind of looking around and I was like, wait, I don't actually know what everyone's working on anymore. And if you're at that stage where you or your CEO or your principal is like, what is everyone actually doing? That's probably a sign that you need to organize your efforts a little bit, and planning can be a good place to start. So a little bit of a dive in a case study on GlossGenius through the years. This top set of bubbles is sort of like company milestones. And then the bottom set of bubbles is our evolution on planning processes. So you'll see I joined in January 2020. I'll tell you the first thing I did, I was coming from a hedge fund. We had, all kinds of 3-year vision docs and this and that. I came in and I was like, okay, so, where are the quarterly plans? It's the beginning of the quarter. I'd love to get up to speed on what's going on in the company. And everyone was like, what are you talking about? We don't have quarterly plans. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, no problem. We're at a startup now. This is like an adjustment for me. This is great. What are the company goals? And everyone was like, to grow as much as possible. And I was like, cool, we're really not at a hedge fund anymore. This is good. And I think at the time I was like thinking to myself, oh, we should do this planning process, and we should do this, we should do that. And what I've realized in retrospect is it was too early. Honestly, it was the right thing for us to be thinking about, um, growing as fast as possible and doing what it takes to grow and throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. And when I did try to spin up a planning process that then got abbreviated by COVID, we got somewhere, but it felt a little bit uh, disconnected from the reality of the day to day because it required people to think so far in advance in a way that wasn't actually that helpful at that point. I really think we were too early. We had about 40 team members at the time that I joined, including contractors. We were very much all like rowing in the same direction. We didn't have multiple product lines. We didn't have tons of like disconnected efforts. We basically had two people on the marketing team. Like it was just a little bit too early. So COVID hit. We all know how that went. December, we closed our Series A in of 2020. 2021, we were sort of in this like big growth mode. We started to do a little bit more department type planning, but no sort of formal company level process. But in December 2021, we ran our first formal operational annual planning. And what's important to call out here is this is different from financial planning that every company should be doing around, and that we certainly were doing around, okay, what are the targets we want to hit? What's sort of like our key revenue metrics? What's our burn rate? Like those core financial metrics for a company. People should be keeping track of, and we certainly were. But what I'm talking about here is more of like, what are we going to do next year, and who's going to do what along those lines. So 2022 was a big year for us in planning. We'll get into that a little bit later on. But a couple things that happened in 2022, we filled out some key leadership roles on the team. We started to have more of that like department type structure that enabled us to do better planning. We raised another round of funding, and we started to run our first quarterly OKR and budget processes, and we started to really publish our first 18-month company strategy. Again, we always had a vision for where we wanted to go. We always had a direction for where we wanted to go, but the more formal documentation of, okay, here's the strategy, here's what we're going after, really, and publishing that to the whole team really came in 2022. Last year was a lot of iterating on our planning process. And then this current year of 2024, we've grown some more, we've changed some more. So we are now over the 250 team member mark, the 75,000 customer mark. In our next iteration of that 18-month strategy, continually iterating on the planning process. And I think where we are right now is in a really good place of the process works for us. It took a lot of bumps to get there, but it works for us where we are, and we will keep growing on it. So a couple of practical tips for getting buy-in to start company level planning. This was a problem I had obviously back in 2020, and frankly kind of had again a couple of other times that I thought about doing this. Is I was like, how can I make this feel like it's important in a way that's tangible for people? What I found is the idea of planning is very sort of if it's too abstract, it feels like a lot of overhead. And if it feels like a lot of overhead, especially if you're at a fast moving startup, people are kind of like, why are we spending time on planning when we could be spending time on doing? We all know where we need to go. And getting over that hurdle of, okay, do we all know where we need to go, and why is this valuable, is really critical for getting buy-in for a planning process. So a couple of tips I have, make it really real. Clearly outline the pain the organization's feeling. I think that helps a lot in anything, honestly, certainly in this. So not just like we need planning because I read an article that says we need planning, or because Evelyn told me we need planning, but we need planning because I am seeing X, Y, and Z things coming from the team that I think would be solved by planning. Um, Make it really easy. That's what this is about, hopefully. Any planning process that feels super onerous is not going to get a lot of buy-in. So I think making it as easy as possible for people, and frankly, like taking on a lot of the work yourself, is going to help a lot here. I think all chiefs of staff are accustomed to having to do that sometimes. Reducing the commitment is important. If you launch a big process, I think this is generally good process advice. If you launch a big process and you're like, this is this big grand process that I launched and we're going to run it this way for the next 2 years, everyone's like, oh my God, I gotta really like make sure this is the way we want to run this for the next 2 years. But if you frame it as, you know what, we're just going to try it. We're going to give it a shot this quarter. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We learn something, we'll move on, we'll iterate, or we won't do it again, really takes the pressure off. It takes the pressure off the process, and it takes the pressure off the people in the process because they don't feel like they're committing to some massive long range forever type thing. They feel like, okay, you know what? Let's try it once. Let's see how it goes. Drawing the comparison is helpful. So I know I just said like don't do planning because people told you to do planning, but um I think drawing a comparison of, hey, this company at this stage that's similar to ours did this planning process and it was really helpful, can help a lot. Um, and then honestly, sometimes you just have to be patient. So that was like me in 2020. I wasn't patient enough. I should have been more patient. The company just might not be ready yet. So that's another sort of sign that you might be uh, maybe a little bit too early in planning. I see a question in the chat on examples of pains an organization would feel beyond I no longer knew what each department or person was working on. I think this is a great one from Jamie. Employees are worried their work isn't impactful. That is a good one you can gauge via engagement surveys. Um, I think there's one that I noticed a lot was like these departments aren't talking to each other. So we're a product-led company. For us, having our marketing engine, our product engine, and our customer support engine talking to each other, all three of them is really critical. So if I was hearing things like marketing has no idea what product features are shipping, so marketing doesn't know what to plan for, that would be a really um, big red flag. Anything that's in the realm of like people who should be working together are either not working on things in coordination with each other or they don't know what the other person's working on. All right. So that's a little bit of sort of like why we do planning, how you might start to do planning. Let's dive into what makes a really good planning process. Um, so poll in the chat, feel free to just pop your answers in. What do you all think are the critical components of a company quarterly plan? Don't be shy. I see revenue targets, measurable goals and metrics, clarity, measurable goals, annual company goals, purpose alignment. Yep, buy-in, vision. What about like, yeah, great. Financial components, objectives, timelines, owners, connecting employees. There's a lot coming in. This is all great. Team, roles and responsibilities. Yep. Yeah, so I think you're all hitting on a lot of really important areas. If you ask me, what are the critical components of a company quarterly plan? If I'm really, really boiling it down, because there's a lot of literature out there about like, these is all the things you need to make a quarterly plan, and here's like the 20 steps you need to take. I think it's two things. The first is a document that says who's going to do what in service of your mission and strategy and how your success will be measured. This document needs to have been internally cross-checked and validated to make sure everyone's working on the right things. This is that alignment piece that I saw a lot of in the chat. And then the second is an agreed upon budget for operational expenses and additional headcount needed to make that plan happen. That's it. Everything that you all mentioned in the chat is really important, either inputs to this or outputs of this. You can see a lot of stuff online about, like I said, all these frameworks and all these steps. When it comes down to it, there's no one right way to do planning. But if you're walking out of, again, this is your quarterly planning, this isn't like your strategy development, but your quarterly planning with some document about who's doing what and how we'll measure it and a budget, you're in pretty good shape. So what about the frameworks? This is what I got when I Google searched company planning frameworks. This is a small snapshot of the hits I got. These are really overwhelming. I don't know what half of these are. And if I'm looking at this, I'm like, which one of these should I even use? And I think a lot of us can get kind of caught up in the frameworks and is trying to get the perfect framework. I would encourage you not to. I think that's where you start to get in the realm of a planning process that feels heavy rather than light. So there's one framework that I like, which I will introduce you to. It is this one. It's the W. Um, I did not come up with this framework. It's from a great article in First Round Capital. I linked it here in the deck. Really recommend you all check out First Round Capital's blog for any sort of management and organizational type resources. They're great, but this is my favorite. Um, and really what it comes down to is alignment. So how does this work? Leadership um, provides context to the teams. Teams create plans based on that context. Leadership then looks at those plans and says, let me make sure all those plans talk to each other. Teams then are bought into those plans and they go and they execute on them. If you keep this in mind, this flow, this is really all you have to do. And all the frameworks that you look at, and we certainly use some of them too, are really just trying to accomplish this. But you can do this without some super heavy framework or process. And I think one of the special sauce things about being a chief of staff is like you know what's best for your organization, and you can figure out how to apply this in a way that works for your company. So practically, the responsibility split in this framework. Leaders are responsible for developing inspiring high-level vision and strategy, sharing concrete goals and targets, making the final decision on what's resourced and prioritized. And teams are responsible for developing execution plans, highlighting risks and gaps, and committing to that goal. And that commitment piece is really, really important. And I think what this gets to is a process that makes everyone feel like they're a part of it. Everyone's bought in. You're getting all the critical inputs, but you're not spinning up a lot of dust around like group decision making of company plans. So here's how we do this at GlossGenius. This is not going to work for every company, but this is just our company. I think it's helpful to share. I would kind of divide our roles and responsibilities into two buckets. There's process drivers and then there's process participants. So process drivers, our CEO is ultimately responsible for the strategy, plan, and budget. So our CEO signs off on all of our plans. She's the escalation points for all of our conflicts. This is like the role of every CEO. At some level, they're always the decision maker. The role of everyone else is to make that decision as easy and clear cut and well teed up as possible for the CEO. So our CFO is the one who's setting company targets around key revenue inputs, and is also responsible, in our case, for managing the budget approval process and ultimately ensuring that we stay on plan with on financial plan. So I know a bunch of you mentioned resourcing, mentioned budgets, financial targets. This is all areas that the CFO is owning. And then what I own is really just a planning process from end to end with I have logistical support from our CEO's EA, but I'm responsible for the planning process. I am the first pass prober of all those department plans. If you think back to that uh, integration step, that's the piece that I'm kind of running first pass on. And then the comm strategy also sits with me. Uh, Department heads are critical bridges for planning. So if we think about process participants, they're the ones who are actually making these department plans. They're the ones who are communicating with their teams about the company targets, who are communicating with the exec team about what's going on at the team level, and they're really bridging between. They're responsible for those department plans and budgets that ladder up to company plans and budgets, and then they're also responsible for team level planning within their departments. And then in our case, team members are mostly responsible for just doing their jobs really well. We don't involve most team members below the department head level in company planning. We've tried this before. It was really chaotic. It led to a lot of time spent from the team, and it led to a lot of people feeling like, wait, I kind of just want the exec team to tell me what we're supposed to go do. And then I will figure out how I'm going to go and help with that. But people felt a little bit adrift, or they felt like, wait, I have all these ideas and the exec team is telling me no, and I don't understand why not. So again, that alignment piece, that vision and communication is really important. We do also hold team members responsible for reading and internalizing plans and asking questions about those plans. We'll get to this in a little bit, but we publish all of our certainly company OKRs, but also department OKRs for everyone at the company to read. And if someone has a question about what a department is working on, the expectation is that they are going and finding that information. And I think that's a really important part of making sure that your entire team feels empowered throughout the planning process. So what does this look like for us? We create OKRs that get funneled down at every level. So we create company level OKRs, which then ladder down to department level OKRs, which then ladder down to team level OKRs, and they're in tight alignment with each other. So I'll give a more practical example here. Let's say that we have a company level OKR around, or a KR around acquiring a certain number of new customers. At the department level, the marketing team would then say, okay, great, we're going to be contributing, you know, X of those customers. What's our plan to get to X? And at the team level, maybe the social media marketing team, who's part of the marketing department, would say, "Okay, I'm not responsible for all of our marketing, you know, new customers, but I'm responsible for this portion. Why? What's my plan to get to Y?" And we're sort of at the leadership level, looking down and making sure, okay, well, we're getting X from marketing and we're getting Y from product and we're getting Z from sales. Are they all actually adding up to what we want at the company level? That's that sort of reconciliation process that's really important. So I saw there was a question in the chat about sort of the financial targets and the company OKRs and how they work together. I think it's really important that they work closely together. At the end of the day, the goals that you should be setting for the company should exist in the context of your financial plan. So what we do is we have financial guidance every quarter, that's based on our annual operating plan from a financial standpoint. Company level OKRs are a part of that. So if we know that we want to hit a certain, you know, revenue target or gross profit target or whatever it is in a given quarter, we can back into, okay, what's the number of new customers we need to acquire? What's the amount of revenue we need to do from these different streams? And what does that mean for company OKRs? And then those two things together for us are the plans and resources. So we're always looking at the budget and the OKRs together. We give ourselves about 3 weeks for planning. It's short. I think it's intentionally short. We've done longer, and honestly, work expands to fill the time. And what ended up happening when we would do a longer time frame is people would just do it at the last minute anyway, but then they would complain that planning takes forever. So we've stepped away from that. And and no, in all seriousness, I think if you give someone, you know, 2 or 3 weeks to do something, they think it is big enough that it should actually take 2 or 3 weeks. And what we were finding was by giving people so much time, we actually were almost creating a problem of people spending too much time on planning, as opposed to setting the right expectations about how lightweight it should be and giving people an appropriate amount of time that match those expectations. So what we would do is we would say, you should only spend a couple hours on this, but you have 2 weeks to do it. And what would happen is everyone would spend 2 weeks sort of thinking about it, and then they would all turn it at the last minute anyway, but they would feel like it was a 2-week process, and it really wasn't. So 3 weeks end to end for us. That includes everything from, setting the company targets to actually, like, finalizing everything. Um, at about the 3-week mark, we determine the company OKRs. That is the CEO and CFO with input from the exec team. When we kick off the planning process to department heads. At about that next week, so about 2 weeks from the end of the quarter, department heads are creating the first draft of department OKRs. And then that last week of the quarter is basically when we're doing that probing stage, that integration stage. If you think back to the W, um, I'm probing, department heads are resubmitting, CEO is completing final probing and sign off, department heads are working on team plans. And then we're also doing that budget and resource planning now that we have a little bit of a sense of what we're focusing on. And finance is consolidating that budget. And then by week 1 of the new quarter, basically everything is done and signed off on. We can run comms, teams can start working day 1 of the new quarter. And finance can kind of like tie up any loose ends on the budget side. So relatively fast process. Um, Kicking off, so I'm gonna go sort of like stage by stage here if you hop back to this W, so context, plans, integration, and buy-in. And then I know there are a bunch of questions in the chat. I'm gonna, we're kind of gathering those and I'll tackle a bunch at the end, but keep putting them in the chat. So kicking off planning, context stage, I would say like the biggest rule of thumb is there's no such thing as over communication. What I find is no one's thinking about planning as much as you are. And so when you are kind of kicking something off to them, making sure that they have a very clear understanding of what they're supposed to do and when they're supposed to do it and why they're supposed to do it is going to help a lot with buy-in, but it's also going to help a lot with you actually getting the stuff that you need on time. This process that we run requires a pretty tight turnaround on stuff. Deadline slippage creates delays across the board, particularly when we're in this integration stage. So over communicate. Um, Best practice for any sort of project management or initiative, designate a key point of contact. It's probably you. It probably should be you. If you have an EA who you work with, they can help with logistical support, but you really want someone who's owning the process, who can go back and forth with leaders at the company about inputs and outputs and everything that they need. A kickoff meeting is very valuable. We do a kickoff meeting every quarter, even though we've run basically the same high level planning process for now several quarters in a row. And actually, it's been about 2 years since we did our biggest iteration on planning. We still always run a kickoff meeting. That kickoff meeting is only department heads and the finance team. So it's people who are relevant for planning. And it's basically just like we go through, you can see a little agenda here on the bottom right. We go through what the OKRs actually are for the quarter, the company OKRs. We go through the planning process overview. We go through deadlines and timelines. We remind them over and over again that they need to get their stuff in on time. And then we take any questions. At this point for us, that meeting is about 15 minutes. It's really short because we've done the process before. And so we kind of go in and we're like, okay, great. Here are the company OKRs. Here's why we set them the way we set them. Here's what you need when you talk to your teams about them. Here's the process. It's basically the same. Here are the small changes that we made from last time. And here are the key dates. Great, like go. But when we first started, this meeting was an hour because we were really trying to make sure that we spent a lot of time with folks on what do they need to do for planning and what does it actually mean. I love a shared Slack channel. I'm not the biggest Slack advocate in a lot of cases, but this is one case where I really, really like a shared Slack channel or Microsoft Teams if you use Teams, whatever your sort of company formal communication system is. So we have a shared Slack channel with, again, every participant in the planning process. So it's all the department heads, our EA's in there. She sort of manages the logistics of it. The finance team, anyone who's sort of involved in the planning process is in that Slack channel. Share drive folder, doc templates, like really just tee things up for people. Have a place where everything lives and keep things organized, and it helps it go a long way in that planning kickoff stage. And this is really the point where you are sharing context with department heads about where the company is going and what you need them to do. That next stage is where teams actually go and build plans. So in our case, it looks something like this. Our plans have a few components: company targets, which we set at the company level; department promises. We use the OKR framework. You could use whatever framework you want. OKR is something that's familiar to a lot of people on our team, so that's what we use. But it's basically like, what is the department promising to do? Measurable results, has to be measurable. Even if it's a qualitative, sometimes we get like, oh, well, we have this key result from the people team that's difficult to quantify. It's like, great, that's fine. Or from the brand team, whatever, it's fine. But something that you can be a qualitative statement, but it has to be something that's falsifiable where you can actually look back on it and say, like, did we do this? So it could be a check the box, yes or no, we did this thing. It could be the company feels different in XYZ ways. It could be we achieved Y% growth in this metric, but something that's measurable. High level timelines, we do ours down to the month for this purpose, if possible. And if not possible, down to the quarter is fine. We're not asking people to say, this is the exact date I'm going to deliver this KR on, but we're saying, like, roughly when do you expect this to land? Dependencies and risks being really clearly outlined is very, very important. Because that's where people start to get into trouble, is if the plans aren't talking to each other. Every department is basically planning in a silo, and then they're expecting things from each other that they're not accounting for in each other's plans, and then things can go very awry. So we ask everyone to clearly outline dependencies and risks up front. And then I like having a list of what we're not doing. Again, if you think about planning is all about alignment, sometimes there's like this unspoken, oh, this is what the team said they were going to do, but we also assumed they were going to go do this other thing that we have talked about as important. So for us, having a place where a department actually writes down, we are not doing X, Y, and Z this quarter, gives a lot of surface level to force a discussion about should we do X, Y, and Z. And if someone feels very strongly, someone on the leadership team feels very strongly about that, or let's say that there's dependency on one team and another team says, well, we're not doing X, Y, and Z that would solve that dependency. You got to know that up front. So we always ask people to put what they're not doing. Um, Department budget plans. I'm not going to go super deep on budgeting, but just to touch on it really briefly, we have basically three components of what the department provides. And then obviously the finance team is running sort of our overall company budget that has a lot more components than this. Operating expenses, either new operating expenses or expenses that are going away. So that could be software, it could be marketing materials, it could be, client travel, like anything like that. New headcount, and we like to forecast out headcount at least a couple of quarters because hiring takes a long time. And then any forecasting on T&E or any other expected costs. So T&E, like if you are at a company where folks travel to offsites or they travel to see each other in different offices, we would put that here. And that helps the finance team kind of figure out, okay, what are the department needs that we're not already accounting for? So we get through that planning stage, teams create plans, and then they pop them back up to me and our CEO, and that's where we're in that integration stage. This stage is a critical step for catching misalignment. This is the stage where I basically will block off a full day and put on some good music and like read everyone's plans very, very closely. And I'll keep notes on the side whenever I see things that either feel a little off to me or that I think are going to require another department. And then I will go back whenever I'm reading. Let's say I read something in customer experiences plan that requires something from tech. I'll make a note and then I'll go back when I'm reading the tech plan and be like, okay, is this accounted for in tech's plan? And if it's not, then I know that's something I need to go and actually like surface and work through. So that dependency piece is really important. If I see something that is not clearly connected to one of our company OKRs, I will call that out. That's really important because again, otherwise people are just off doing things that aren't tightly connected to your OKRs or your goals if you don't use OKRs. Forcing difficult conversations, which is again, I think like a critical part of the chief of staff role, an unheralded part of the chief of staff role. This is a place where your forcing difficult conversations muscle really has to shine because what you're basically doing is you're saying this department head says this thing is important and this department head says this thing is not important and we need to resolve that. So finding places where there's tension, finding places where there's lack of clarity, and then surfacing that. You don't have to resolve it yourself, but at least surfacing it to resolve is really important. And then I think a missed step sometimes in this integration stage is actually having a process where you say, this is good now. So some sort of sign off from the CEO or whoever signing off on your plan saying, okay, great, this is now done. Like data department, you are good, like go run with your plans. Otherwise, people sort of don't know if plans are set and ready. Sometimes they're confused about is this open question a blocker or is it just a question? I think having that really clear moment where you say, we're done with this stage is very, very important. Um, as always, you got to keep everyone on track. I don't think any of this is going to be news to any of you. This is bread and butter. Put on your cat herding hat. Planning is no one's full-time job. Most people don't like it that much. They know they have to do it and they are usually good participants, but they are doing other stuff too. And these deadlines can easily slip. So again, communication is key. Make sure you're not the blocker. So for example, when I'm reviewing everyone's plans, I block off that time and I say, I am committed to, if you get me this by this time, I will get it back to you by that time, bar none, full stop. If you don't get it back to me, no guarantees. And actually last quarter, I had to be like, if you don't get it back to me by this time, we are both working on the weekend on this because we need to get it on the CEO's desk Monday morning. So if you don't want to work on the weekend and if you don't want to force me to work on the weekend, you got to get it to me by this hour. And that worked pretty well. Um, and then I think invest in that one-to-one time. It can be really easy when you're kicking off something like this to say, okay, great, it's kicked off. Everyone's going to run and do their thing. Check-ins with your leaders, check-ins with different folks around the organization. How are things going? Are you blocked? What are your questions? even if it's informal, can go a really long way towards smoothing this whole process over. So I would say don't just kick it off and then walk away and expect everything to come back by the deadline. Regularly check in with your team members. And then finally, that buy-in stage. So you've done your plans, they're all ready, you're going to share them out. How do you get buy-in? Thoughtful transparency is really important here. It helps drive accountability in both directions. It helps make team members aware of what they're supposed to be doing, and it helps give team members surface area to probe the leadership team too. I think both verbal and written channels are important. So we do town halls every 6 weeks. We always make sure one of them is in the first 2 weeks of the quarter so that we're able to talk about our quarterly plans. We have a weekly company newsletter that goes out. In that newsletter, we share updates on our plan, but we also will share what the plans actually are. And then I think generally giving people a chance to ask questions. Like, this doesn't all have to be on you, but encouraging department heads and managers to talk about this in their team meetings, opening up office hours, finding ways to get you know what works best for your organization, but find ways to get questions surface so you can answer them proactively and people don't just kind of like spin in a bubble around them. And then you did these all this great planning work. How do you stick to the plan? A couple of tips. Don't change targets mid-quarter. It's really, really tempting to change targets mid-quarter if you feel like you're gonna miss your targets. It's, like, really tempting. Um, Resist the urge unless there's a very, very good reason. Obviously, if something completely shifts in your company strategy or something like that, you should change your targets mid-quarter, but if it's just because you think you're gonna miss them, um, it sends the wrong message to the organization to change targets. It sends them a message that the targets aren't real. So, if you know you're gonna miss your targets, you should learn from it and you should talk about that and you should talk about what you learned. But really, really fight that urge to change targets mid-quarter. We've gone through this a few times where we've changed some goals in the earlier days, and then people kind of felt like, well, the goals aren't real. And then they didn't really know how they should react to the goals. Constantly connect back to OKRs in everything you do. So if you think about like comms in town halls or other company newsletters, always talk about OKR progress. If you're thinking about kickoffs for different projects, connect it back to the OKRs or again, whatever your framework is, but connect it back to your plan and your goals. So team members are really internalizing what those actually are. And then light motions to check in on progress. It's gonna depend a lot on your organization. At the very least, you should probably have some sort of data dashboard that tells you how you're doing against your OKRs. That's usually helpful. MBRs, monthly business reviews, are a framework some people like. We've started doing those. They're helpful. Weekly exec meetings, you could carve out, one leadership team meeting a month to talk about progress and OKRs, or maybe it's every 2 weeks. Again, you know what's best for your organization, but having some motion to check in on the progress and surface issues and blockers is going to help you make sure you're actually hitting your targets rather than just creating a plan at the beginning of the quarter and then like hoping for the best at the end of the quarter. So, a lot of information. I'm going to quickly go through. I know there are some questions in the chat. Quickly go through a little bit of how we've evolved planning as our company has grown, and then we'll take questions after that. So, quick reminder of what we do, that ladder setup, and then that about 3 weeks of planning. So 2020, 2021, we had found product market fit. We were in hyper growth mode. We were throwing a lot of stuff at the wall to see what sticks. We were scaling out new channels. We were still building our leadership team, and most departments were still very small. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but really the way we planned was a lot more day by day, week by week plan led by departments or teams. It was more siloed. The CEO kept us on track with the company financial plan. And we did have that long-term vision. We had a quarterly product roadmap, but we didn't have a formalized team-wide 12 to 18-month strategy to bridge those gaps. So planning was chaotic at that point. 2022 is when we really did a big turn on company planning. So we raised our Series B. We had a fully staffed leadership team. We were growing our investment in departments. The team size was growing a lot. So we were at about 170 team members by end of year. If you recall, we were about 40 when I joined at the beginning of 2020. And this is when we really did our first set of planning processes. So we did a first annual planning process outside of budget and financial plan, which was a virtual offsite with the full leadership team. I do not recommend a virtual offsite if you can avoid it. It is a lot of time to sit and stare at each other on Zoom. We were about 2 full days, and it was The brain drain was brutal on that one. So if you have the opportunity to do this either in person or in chunks, great. But if not, build in a lot of stretch breaks for people to take that time. Um, we developed our first 18-month strategy, which was oriented around 3 strategic pillars. We did that at an in-person offsite, much better than the virtual. And then we did our first formal company planning process for quarters, which kicked off for Q3. So what did that look like? We did not have company OKRs. We just had financial targets or metrics-based targets, and then we had our strategic pillars that we had developed in the strategic plan. Our OKRs were tied to our strategic pillars, at the department OKRs. Our budget planning was connected to the quarter ahead, and we did not do a lot of deep reconciliation upward. So again, going back to that W shape, I think we kind of missed on that third step of integrating the plans. We did a great job of coming up with plans and not a great job of integrating the plans. The other piece that we kind of missed on, if I'm looking back on it, is we made the process really complicated by connecting OKRs to strategic pillars instead of just connecting them to company goals. And the company goals and the strategic pillars are obviously very closely connected, but the connection was not always obvious to the team. So we ran through a few iterations. Last year sort of kept iterating, and then this year we decided to do a big change again. So where are we now? We raised our Series C in mid 2024. Sorry, that should say 2023. Raised our Series C in mid 2023. A lot more specialization in roles, forward-looking 18-month strategy, clearly defined product roadmap, longer range strategic vision. We're close to 300 team members now. Departments are bigger. We have more operational complexity. So what does it actually look like? Our annual planning is now very tightly connected to our 12 to 18-month strategy. We have a clearly defined set of targets on key metrics that we need to hit, set by finance. We did begin that company OKR process that we talked about with like the ladders. And then I and the CEO took on a heavy reconciliation burden, or responsibility, I should say, to ensure we're actually focusing on the most important things. So now there's a lot more of like, okay, let's talk upfront. What do we think each department should have? If we get a department plan back that doesn't have X, like that will be bad. What do we think every department should be focusing on? How are we making sure that those department heads know in advance? Then how are they building light plans, no more than a couple of hours on this plan, that help us understand how we'll get there and how we'll make progress against it. We have much better dashboarding. We do monthly business reviews, and we're continually trying to make planning lighter and lighter and lighter. This is particularly happening on the budget side. So we're introducing sort of like rolling procurement rather than needing every quarter for every department head to like think ahead to every possible expenditure they might have. We're doing a little bit more of a rolling procurement approach. And a few other changes to how we're talking about OKRs to reduce the workload for department heads. And I would say it's working pretty well. So few lessons. Your planning process needs to meet your company where it is. You will see the evolution of our planning process and how it mapped to our company. It's really important that you don't create too heavy or too light of a process for your organization. If you're at that really early stage, maybe all you need is a Word document that says this is what we promise we're going to do. If you're much bigger than we are now, maybe you actually need more structure around team goals in addition to department goals, or maybe you need more check-ins than what we have. Data is key. Doing all of this in a vacuum leads you to set targets that are not informed by data, and then they're sort of just random. And what ends up happening is they may or may not be connected to your financial plan, but they also may or may not be realistic. And I think for us, we always want our targets to be really ambitious, but also actually be attainable. Having data to understand where that line is critical. Repetition helps. It's always rocky in the beginning. If you kick off a planning process and it doesn't go well, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do planning. It just means that no process goes well the first time you run it, and you should learn and iterate and do a feedback survey and talk to people and make some changes. But resist that temptation to like totally throw the thing out just because it wasn't perfect at the beginning. Don't miss that probing step. Our planning has gotten much, much, much better since we started doing that more. And I think we've gotten a better outcome. I think departments heads have felt more empowered. I think I and the CEO have felt better about where plans have actually netted out because we've incorporated that probing step. And then simplify wherever you can. Don't worry about that Google result of, you know, tons and tons and tons of frameworks. Really just focus on the communication, the buy-in, the context, the plans, the integration, and you will get there. And then iterate through time. So what's next for us? Continually making richer company OKRs, more accountability on an ongoing basis. We're improving our data dashboards. We're switching up how we do MBRs. We're looking at, can we understand a little bit more about how teams are tracking in a light touch way? Even more forward-looking planning. So, moving beyond quarterly planning and sort of 18-month strategy into how we can think even longer range. And then greater consolidation of ownership of the process. I think one thing that doesn't work super well for us anymore is the mishmash between me and our CFO and our CEO, who are kind of working together as process drivers. It was fine when we started, and it's sort of now that we're in a little bit of a rhythm, we want to consolidate even more ownership to make it easier for people to know who to go to. Okay, I know we have 8 minutes left. I'm gonna zip through a couple more practical tips and tricks and then turn it over to questions. So I said this like 12 times, but I'll say it again. Keep things simple. Resist the urge to go 0 to 60. It's not gonna serve anyone. Communication is key. Really hold the line. Make the trade-offs clear so people understand why you're asking them to do things at certain times. For example, when I said, "If you don't get this to me by now, we will both have to work on the weekend." That was maybe a little bit aggressive of an example of me holding the line and making it really clear that they understand why. Um, Call out problems. This is one of your biggest roles as a chief of staff in anything, and especially in this. You have a set of superpowers around understanding your organization that other people don't have. And you have perspective of things that are happening around the company that other people don't have. So lean into that, call out problems where you see them, call out misalignment. You don't have to resolve all of it, but you do have to call it out. And then finally, check your ego at the door. It sucks to run a process that people complain about. Certainly sucks to do it when you feel like it could have been better too, but you will keep trying and you'll keep persevering. It will get better. People will stop complaining about it because people actually do realize planning is helpful. And you'll iterate and it'll be fine. And just recognize it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. Finally, useful tools. FigJam AI has some great templates. I love FigJam AI. Google Docs. We're a big Google Docs company. Slack, very helpful. But really, I think the best tool is you and your brain and the relationships that you have. And if you lean into that and you build something that works for your organization, you will get there and it will be great. Okay, that's all I got in content. Would love to take some questions.
There are some questions in the chat
Great.
that were pretty interesting. Would you like to ask yours about closing the quarter?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Evelyn. This is super helpful. I do have a question around the timeline that you put together, 3 weeks, end of the quarter.
Mhm.
I was curious, how do you integrate closing the quarter, let's say closing Q2 and welcoming Q3? That's where we find it super tricky. Kind
Yeah.
of like formally closing and then opening another one.
Yeah, it's hard. There's no perfect way to do it, honestly. So what we do is we have a pretty good sense of where we're gonna end the quarter, by the time that we actually set those company OKRs at 3 weeks before. And it's not gonna be 100% perfect, but our business is predictable enough that we usually have a clear understanding of, okay, great, this is relatively baked. This is relatively predictable. This might have this kind of movement, but it's all movement that's within the cone of what we would expect. And so we set our targets based on kind of where we think the quarter is going to end up. It's unusual for us to be, I can't think of a time that we've been like so far off base that we've had to revise after we've kicked off the planning. But I think really it's about like tight communication with the finance team, ensuring that they are giving like and the data team ensuring they're giving the best possible view of where we think we're going to end up, and then just honestly being willing to accept a little bit of variance. Something else that we do that I think helps with that is we do set our targets high. So we intentionally set targets for the company that are higher than our baseline needed within our operating plan. I think it is both like practical and motivational to do that. So it reduces a little bit of the risk of like okay, if you end the quarter a little lower than you thought you were going to be, you still have some buffer room.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mhm.
Actually, that's a good segue into Tammy's question. Tam, do you want to unmute yourself and ask about measuring success?
Yeah, thank you. I want to see in the previous questions about how we actually um, plan for previous quarter to the next. Can you give us a sample? How do you track, measure that success in metrics? What tool do you use to actually capture what works, what doesn't work for this quarter, and how do you measure to move forward? How do you plan for the next one when you carry over from previous to the next?
Yeah, I think I understand your question, but let me answer. And if I don't, if I don't touch on anything that you're curious about, please stop me and I'll add on. So
Sure.
tools wise, we use Looker for data. We have dashboards that show progress against the goals. Um, I don't think it really matters what tool you use. I think it just matters that you have a tool that you can see, your leadership team can see, obviously finance data can see, that shows your progress. What we will do before, sort of as part of kicking off the company OKRs, is we'll look back on performance again up to that point, but we usually know where we're tracking. And we'll do a little bit of a retro, just informally, of like, okay, do we think that we set these goals in the right way? And if we didn't, why not? So I'll give an example. Actually, a few quarters ago, we set a very aspirational goal for customer activations for new customers coming in, and we missed it. And we didn't miss it in a way that was like concerning for our financial plan at all, but we missed it in a way that felt big to the company because we set a target very, very high. And so we actually took that and we debugged, like, okay, why did we miss that? What did we learn from that? What we learned was we actually weren't looking at the right data, and we weren't realistic enough about certain seasonal effects when we set that. So then we said, okay, great, we got to incorporate the data team more in this goal setting process. Um, I think it's really just about that iteration and kind of recognizing that you're never going to get 100% perfect, but drawing a bit of a stake in the ground of like, where do you actually want to end up on your targets? And then did you get there or not? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it actually did. I think what you said is about the reflection going back to how long do you go back to actually getting understanding the data, right? You know what I'm saying? Yeah, so
Yeah.
to actually get to where you are. This is
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. Like, I think the Looker and sort of understanding the metrics through time is important. Having a really good data team helps a lot. Especially one that's looking at your metrics based on timeline and not just based on like linear projection. If your
Mhm.
business has any seasonality to it, which ours does. I mean, honestly, there's no like magic bullet solution. We iterate, we learn a lot. We make sure that every quarter we're debugging, did we set our targets well or not? And if not, what are we going to do to set them better next time?
This is pretty cool framework. Thank you so much for sharing
Cool.
with us,
Of course.
Evelyn. Thank
Yeah,
you.
of course.
Yeah. Do you have time for one more, or
Yeah. Yep.
yeah? So I was thinking we'll go to Tabitha. Are you still on the call, Tabitha?
I I am. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah,
Okay,
sure. Yeah, we
perfect.
can hear you.
Um, my question was a kind of a spin-off of Tammy's. So I'm curious on how you are integrating the successes and failures and learnings of the past quarter and integrating them into the next. And I also, the question I had above that one was, you share a framework for a quarterly process. I'm curious if you have experience with a biannual process or something other than quarterly.
Yeah, let me hit that one quickly and then I'll touch on your other one. So when I was at Bridgewater, we did biannual planning, and our tech department here has excuse me, at GlossGenius has experimented with biannual planning. I don't like it. I think it causes people and I should say I don't like it in the context of like I work at a startup that prioritizes speed. It's great in some other contexts, but for us, like I'm at a startup that prioritizes speed. When we do our planning, it really shouldn't feel like some big overhaul where everyone's stopping their work and then they're going to go and they're going to work on all this new stuff. I see it as much more of a continuous process, and this actually gets into your second question, but I see it much more as a continuous process where every quarter you have a checkpoint of, are we on the right track? I find if you're doing this is just my personal experience, those longer range planning cycles almost encourage people, first of all, to again treat it as a very heavy process, but second, to have trouble estimating what they can actually get done in that time span. I find people have a really hard time estimating what they can get done in half a year. So either they are not ambitious enough or they're too ambitious. I would personally prefer that we set the expectation of like we get things done every quarter. We move at a cadence that get things done every quarter. And I think it also makes it easier for people to set realistic goals. So that's my personal view on biannual. Honestly, when I was at Bridgewater, I found that when we did biannual, like people sort of just did everything in the last 2 months anyway. So it was a little bit of that work expands to fill the time thing again. And then how we measure the success of the goals, sorry, how we integrate successes and failures from the previous quarter into the next quarter's plan. I think it's a mix of things. So I think first of all, I view planning as a checkpoint in a continuous process of working to get things done. So if I think about like marketing, for example, the marketing team doesn't so totally start working on new channels every quarter. Like the things that our paid marketing folks were doing on the last day of the quarter are basically the same things as what they're doing on the first day of the quarter. They have a different orientation, maybe around how they're doing it. They have a different set of targets, but the activities are the same. And I think encouraging, I'm not dodging your question, I promise, but I actually think it's important to encourage a very continuous learning process and not just use the quarter mark as a way to learn, which is something that is easy to fall into the trap of doing. We've certainly fallen into that trap before. So that's one, is like build out ways to continuously be learning, and then the quarter will be actually less of an important checkpoint for that. But more practically, so I mentioned the exec team conversation that we have at the beginning of the company OKR process around how did we set this well, how did we not. We also ask every department head to reflect on their previous set of quarterly goals. What went well, what didn't go well, what did they not accomplish, why did they not accomplish that, and what are they going to learn and incorporate moving differently? And we just put that in that same Word doc. So we do ask them all to go through that reflection.
Got it. Thank you. That's really helpful. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Awesome. I apologize. I do have to jump off to another call, but thank you all for being such a great audience. If I didn't get to any of your questions, you can always Slack me in the Ask a Chief of Staff channel. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to talk about this stuff anytime.
Thank you so much, Evelyn, and thank you, everyone. We'll see you another time. Bye.
Bye, everyone.